Hey, welcome back to another Bitcoin Reformation podcast. I'm Ben Haupt, joined as always with my good friends Jared Townley and David Ruffner, three pastors talking about Bitcoin. Things are pretty fine in my world. We're getting ready for Christmas break as we record this, and really looking forward to just taking some time to take some time off. It's been a crazy 6 month stretch starting with this new role with PLI. Loving the work, but ready for break and ready to be able to just surf Bitcoin Twitter and not have to feel guilty about anything else or be worried about getting back to regular responsibilities. So, how about you guys? How are things, Jared?
So, right, we recording today the 19th of December, and last night was my daughter's first preschool Christmas program, and man, I mean,
Imagine.
yeah, it's just like kids at 3, almost 4 years old, up there singing the Christmas carols, you know, took a video of her and the like 3 or 4 people around her, like, girls that are like adjusting their tights. My daughter is pulling up her dress, like, oh my goodness, like, Zoe, put that down, like, stop it. All of those fun little turning around, not looking at the stage. I mean, it's hard not to just be so, oh, they're so cute. It's so awesome. So, like, both a cute thing, but also a wow, I have a kid who's old enough to be in a preschool program. Really makes me feel like time's going quick in that way, but a joy to be a part of it. And it's a great time to, as a pastor who serves as his main role as school and youth ministries, to get up in front of 200 grandparents and parents and talk about, hey, mission, vision, this is why we're here, this is what we're doing. Hey, I know it's December, but let's talk about May when you're going to take your kids out, and then enrollment for next year. Like, we want them for 8 years. Like, send them here. You think this is good? Look at all the good stuff that we could do. I mean, it's really cool. Love those moments sort of in my job and my role here too. So fun times. Always good, as people say, to see the holidays through the lens of children. But as you maybe hear too, I'm a little sick still. Seems like everybody is dealing with some sort of virus of sorts, and I have succumbed to that as well. So forgive my muddy sounding voice. It's not the microphone, it's my actual body. So I'm okay, surviving. How are you, David, in sunny California, right?
Yeah, pretty clear skies today. It's cool up here on the mountain. Our mountain town needs snow. We need snow for the resorts, for the dollars that come up the hill this time of year. It's a little bit quieter than when we do get snow, so I'm of two minds on that. I like the quiet, but I know how much our community needs the snow and the dollars, so we're looking forward to that. The two older boys are home from college, so all six of us are home, and we have had something run through our family as well, including me, respiratory, whatever, this week, maybe even some sort of respiratory flu, but slowly on the mend. The voice is a little bit deeper than normal, maybe. I don't know. My energy is lower than normal, but really we're looking forward to what is ahead. I'm trying to think what is ahead here. We have a guest pastor at our little church here this Sunday, which we're excited about, and then looking forward to Christmas Eve worship. I'll be preaching there, Megan leading the music. And apart from that, our boys are off working the hours they can get right now at the ski and board rental snow shop. But again, they need more work also. So we're enjoying family time, and at the same time, kids are running out of the house to see friends, go to work, go to sports, go to school still. So it's a busy time. My quiet will come after January 1, so I'll look forward to that. And apart from that, since we've last recorded, we've had some more all-time highs in the old Bitcoin world. So it's been exciting. I've had some people reach out to me, but it's also been kind of quiet. So real interesting.
I don't know if this is our transition into the next thing or not, but I feel like I've had some very interesting conversations lately. So between my mom sending me a text congratulating me that Bitcoin is over 100,000, which is just kind of weird, but then also at a Christmas party this last week, somebody said, hey, so I hear you're into Bitcoins. And so that launched into a good conversation about, what is this thing? Oh, hey, I don't ever invest in things I don't understand. So like, tell me about it. What is it going to do? All those sort of things. But then I think the transition into where we're going to go today, continuing to talk about terms, I sat down with one of our church finance teams, and super intelligent guy. Like, this is not anything I say is not a critique of him. If you're listening to this, it was a great conversation. It truly was. I was very impressed with his thoroughness in what he already knew and sort of the takes that he had in regards to it. But as we talked, I think his big sort of claims were that Bitcoin itself has maybe missed the mark on what its original goal was, to be a global currency, right? An international cross-border currency. But that in some ways, from his eyes and the ways that we talked about it in our why every church should invest in Bitcoin or buy Bitcoin, that it's just something like a regular stock, but maybe it's more difficult because there's no profit to earnings ratio. There's no company that's producing a iPhone or a tablet that he can go and check their sales and their expectations with. That to measure it is so impossible. And so if you take that, the time piece, it's only been here for 15 years. He was just kind of like, I know I'm probably going to miss a lot of it, but maybe I'll buy it in the future when it's been here for longer. And so I really respect the conversation that we had. But I think, David, I'll launch this one over here.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it. So why, in the moment, I did my best to talk about why I think it hasn't failed as a currency. But maybe let's dissect that. What would you say to him if he came to you and said, yeah, this thing, Bitcoin, it's supposed to be a currency, and nobody uses it as a currency, or very few people do. So 15 years later and still nobody's using it, it must have clearly failed, right?
Yeah. So the three divisions here we've talked about in the past, and I'll just name them again for this very conversation, is you want something to be, if it's going to be money, they say, right? You want it to be a store of value. That's not what your gentleman was disagreeing with. You want it to be a medium of exchange. And then finally, or third at least, a unit of account. Yeah, and I can speak real quickly to all three of those. Store of value, it's been a blessing to me and my family in the store of value frame. And that's not just for the future. I think I've shared it here. I started saving my property taxes in Bitcoin and even accounting for capital gains. I got a coupon recently, just a week and a half ago, when I paid my property taxes again. It was like getting a coupon on that. So I both used it as a store of value. I did use it as a payment method, really. Ultimately, I did have to cash it out to cash and then send it. That's true. But then I also keep track of, maybe that's a chart I'll show someday, our home priced in Bitcoin. So I actually do all three. And in the 4 years since we've purchased our home, and to be clear, we purchased it with dollars, which is to say we borrowed dollars, and now we're paying back those dollars slowly. But still, if you were to look at the purchase price in Bitcoin back then, 4 years ago versus now, it's like it's dropped 90% when priced in Bitcoin. So I'm having fun looking at all three all days. But back to your gentleman, he was saying it's failed specifically in that medium of exchange. What do we have to say about that? I also that worried me for a while. I am one of those weird guys where I have paid for some products natively with Bitcoin. Typically, it's Bitcoin products with Bitcoin. That's true. Although I know of some pubs that will allow you to pay for pints of beer with Bitcoin, and I plan to go to one down in Riverside sometime soon even. So there are more and more places there. But this is where Gresham's law comes in. Gresham's law states, and I'll quote it here, bad money drives out good money. Well, what does that mean? You can have competing monies at times. We know that. It's hard for us in America probably to think about that because we don't think in terms of competing monies. We think in terms of US dollar. And we have this exorbitant privilege to be not only a relatively stable national currency, but we're the global reserve currency, or the global, that's not right. We're the global, what do we call it? Anyways, it's recognized globally and it's used globally But you can go to places. In fact, Ben was to one of those places. I think he mentioned it last recording. He had been to Argentina. Argentina is doing a lot better than they have been for any number of years and decades prior under their new president, Milei. They actually just had a budget surplus. Oh my goodness. Can you imagine the U.S. government having a budget surplus? We haven't done that in forever. They had a budget, but they have had any number of episodes in their life where their Argentinian, is it Argentinian peso? I'm trying to think, Ben. Yeah, has been melted away like overnight, debased at huge percentage points overnight, which is why Argentinians oftentimes have loved having US dollars in their hands. And if you're an Argentinian and you have a store of the value of your life force, your work, your labor, the fruits of it in US dollars, and you've got it in the Argentinian peso, and you've got a choice of spending one or the other for bread tomorrow, which one are you going to spend? You're going to spend the one that is more likely to be deflated away. You're going to spend your native Argentinian currency and hold on to that US dollar. And so this is what Gresham's law does. It at least, I think, should give us a moment of sobriety and pause to the critique that your friend offered you. And God bless him. Great critique, right? I've even felt that sort of critique in my own gut. But then you stop and say, wait a second, if one is being a great store of value, and in fact is even gathering to itself more value at a very quick pace, certainly compared to the dollar, and then you have the dollar. So you have Bitcoin versus the dollar. Well, which one are you going to keep spending? You're going to keep spending your dollars and not your Bitcoin. So it's true that I can't go to all the merchants I go to and they don't all offer for me to spend in dollars. That's true. But even if they did right now, the question is, would I spend my dollars or would I spend my Bitcoin? And I'll stop there.
I would just jump in a little bit of background on Gresham's law. I read some interesting stuff from this guy named Philip Robinson Ressner or Rüssner. He's a German dude, an economist in Germany. And very interestingly, he's written on the economy and especially on stuff like currency devaluation in Martin Luther's time during the Reformation. And he tells some really fascinating stories about how Gresham's law really kind of came into being. So what would happen with coinage, which was actually using precious metal and then just stamping it with the governor's seal or whatever to show that it was officially minted, is that people would start to get their metal scissors and they would snip out a part of the coin. And over time, if you're just cutting out a sliver, you'd save those, and you could then cook them down and make yourself another coin. It's a way of kind of doing currency fraud, essentially. And the problem is that once a coin has been clipped, then people get this idea like, hey, I could do this too. And all of a sudden, what seemed like a controlled supply from a centralized government, the people begin to debase the currency. This is where the original term debasing the currency comes from, where they were literally cutting the currency apart. But over time, as people realize, hey, I could do that too, more and more people start to clip the currency, and so bad money literally does chase out good money because people want to use it. And yet it's this recognition that over time that becomes a real problem, because all of a sudden, if somebody clips a tenth of the coin out, now if you're going to melt it down in the future, if a new government's going to take over, they're going to have to take that 90%, and they're not going to have enough to create a new full coin. And so it's a problem that's been happening for a very long time, and it just keeps on happening. And the real interesting thing about Bitcoin is that it's actually resistant to that kind of very human way of dealing with money, where it's, in our day, it's not the everyday pleb, as we call ourselves in the Bitcoin community, but it's not the everyday Joe that's debasing the currency. It's actually the centralized government. But Gresham's law still hangs over our heads. Human beings love to do this with our money, and Bitcoin stops human beings from fiddling with it.
I like you're pointing out, I think, the more general principle here that bad money doesn't necessarily only mean the dollar, right? And even what makes a money bad could be a different thing too. So like we talked ad nauseum about how the US government prints dollars. I think we would say that's the sort of main problem with the US dollar today. But like what you're saying, Ben, is like, hey, in some day and age, they could snip off parts and make more. And so I think this is another good time to point out too the sort of non-US Western centric mindset that we need to kind of adapt, that Bitcoin is even good, better money compared to currencies where women aren't allowed to hold them, right? And so that makes that currency bad for that person, that individual, whereas Bitcoin then is a good money that that person can have. And so I think it's both a narrow, this is a bad thing for the US dollar, right? Or the US Bitcoin is a better money than the US dollar, but it's much bigger than just that too, that it truly is the best money, and it will drive out all forms of other currency, whether their problems are debasement by people, debasement by government, the ability to be held and used, all those sort of things. Bitcoin is just truly a better money overall.
And it kind of challenges Gresham's law, frankly. And that's a surprising thing, because there hasn't been a way really to challenge Gresham's law. Gresham's law says that bad money always wins, not good. And so, but that's kind of what I think Gresham's law is pointing out is a failure of humanity, right? The problem is
right.
People who have these dollars, and we always kind of muck it up because of our greed. And Bitcoin is sort of resistant to that, and that is a really novel thing.
Right. Yeah, thanks. I think I misspoke there. Thank you for clearing that up.
I think of it in terms of, as well, those three parts: store of value, medium of exchange, unit of account. The critique I'd want to offer, and it sounds like from talking to Jared beforehand, he talked to the gentleman about it, he was fine with it, is that if you feel that Bitcoin falls down on being a medium of exchange, well, let me throw it right back at the person, gently, but nevertheless throw it back to them. Does the US dollar fall down at all? And where and how is it falling down? Well, it's falling down as a store of value, right? And so if it's falling down as a store of value, and yet it's great in terms of medium of exchange and unit of account, well, that typically means a couple of things, but it definitely means this. That means that anytime dollars come into your hand, you better spend them right away, right? If your currency, in our case the US dollar, is great for a unit of account and great for medium exchange, but it's kind of bad, like really bad and getting worse as a store of value, then we are incentivizing all kinds of short-term thinking, right? Spend it now. You're better off spending your paycheck the day you get it than holding on to it for a week or a month or a year. And maybe we'd say to individuals, but definitely to parents. I'm thinking of you, Jared, and your wife with young kids, or Ben and I with high school and college age kids. Like, there's a lot of conversations to be had about saving, right? About having a longer term, time preference. But how do you do that when your money is actively working against you for that? And your money's like actively making you a real short-sighted, today, in the moment sort of creature. How do you think longer term thoughts, plan for the future, save up for things of quality as opposed to chintzy things right now? So all those things are actually a part of this conversation as well.
Well, I think another thing too that he said, which I think makes him just very intelligent, that uh, a lot of people don't, at least he says, don't save in dollars. Like you don't know a lot of people who actually have money in the mattress sort of thing, right? And so it wasn't enough for him. And again, I respect that. It's not enough to just say, well, you need to get out of the dollar. Well, nobody saves in dollar. It's only meant to be spent. You're not meant to hold on to it and try and like gain a whole bunch of money just from keeping your dollars. But what I think we've talked about, and what I tried to push to him too, was that, well, maybe like a good money you could just hold, and like you wouldn't need to go out and invest in something and take that risk in trusting a corporation or a government and buying their bonds. That's how the world is today, and yes, that's what we should do, so to say. But what if there is a way in which Bitcoin really is those three things and does all of them well, and that's actually good for your money, your base money, to increase in value, and so then you can still spend it too. That it's not a either or, I think, with Bitcoin, and that's not. I would say that's not how we think in today's world. That most people think, hey, I have my dollars in my bank account. Yeah, maybe I'm in some high yield and I get 4% back now, but then I have my Roth IRA or my 401k, and that's where my real savings is. And I think Bitcoin kind of comes on the plane and says, hey, you can still have those, get your tax advantage, but you just need me. You don't need both of those things. You don't need another thing. I can do all of that for you. And that's what makes me the best money, the best utility for you as you're trying to save and spend.
I want to jump in here and just maybe connect this conversation that we've been having to one that I've had with some friends recently. So I pick up on this notion that your friend said, well, Bitcoin isn't accomplishing what it set out to accomplish, or on the kind of the reverse of that, which I've heard from a few of my friends, and I do appreciate, like, this Bitcoin Reformation podcast is truly a conversation with friends. So if you're listening to this and you've been part of this conversation, the way I think about this is that I'm finally getting a chance to say the thing that I wish I would have said when I was asked about something back in the day, because I'm not always quick on my feet. So I hope that if you're listening, that this is truly a conversation. So I've heard from a couple of friends now that Bitcoin has hit its big highs. Oh, that boy, I bet you're just grateful for Donald Trump and all that he's done for Bitcoin. And I mean, on the one hand, like, there's no doubt about it that some of Donald Trump's policies are momentarily benefiting the USD, the US dollar value of Bitcoin, undoubtedly. But I think it's a huge mistake to say, oh, if Donald Trump hadn't come along, Bitcoin would have failed as a project or something like that. I actually think that Bitcoin will shrug off Donald Trump like it shrugged off everybody else. TikTok, another block. It's just some code. It doesn't care about human beings. And so that's to say to anybody that's listening, the plea is stop listening to mainstream media talk about where Bitcoin is failing or where it's succeeding, because the mainstream media is incentivized to come up with headlines, and that's their business proposition. We do well to just, I hate to be one of those kind of check out of mainstream media people. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but Bitcoin has such an audacious claim on reality that it deserves to be studied in its own and understood on its own terms. And I think that that's what we're trying to do on this show, is at least to talk through Bitcoin on its own terms rather than following these kind of media headlines.
If I could take it and run it, start at a different spot and come right up to the same moment that we're in, it'd be interesting if Bitcoin weren't on the scene, this might be another sort of thought exercise. Let's say Bitcoin's not around, but inflation is happening. And just because of the pinch of inflation, we start to really educate ourselves on economics, the history of fiat money, the history of American fiat, from the partial loss of the gold standard, the establishment of central banks, which has not been there the whole time. Our nation has been here, the Federal Reserve, all these things coming off the gold standard in 1971. Let's say we did all that, and then we started dreaming of a currency that sidestepped so many of these pitfalls and quagmires. I think it's my contention, and I've seen the heads nod here as well, that we'd start listing a lot of the qualities that actually Bitcoin has. And maybe that's something somebody could do as their own thought experiment. Sit down on paper and say, what is it that's there? It's related to your coin clipping. If we remove the shears from the human hand that can otherwise clip those, that's really good. As Christian people, we pray often in the Lord's Prayer, lead us not into temptation. So Lord, help us in that matter. But we also come to know ourselves and what does tempt us and does tempt us communally. And let's not be tempted in those ways. And then let's celebrate tools that come along when they do come along that take that temptation from us totally. So I would say that if you just look at the negative attributes of fiat and start coming up with a wish list, I believe that Bitcoin, ticks off a lot of those things. It is interesting that Trump is sort of pro Bitcoin. I'll take it in the moment, to be honest, Ben. I like it. I tend to think he's pro Bitcoin simply because the prior administration had positioned themselves against it. I think it honestly went like that. Things could have been more fickle. The prior administration, or the soon-to-be prior administration, could have been pro Bitcoin, and I wonder if Trump might have been against it then. He certainly was.
Totally agree with that.
His first term. So this is, the present moment has, I think, more to do with that. Two sides constantly differentiating themselves from the other, even if it's sort of thoughtlessly so at times, or at least perceived as such by me. All right, so Gresham's law says that. Here's another one, and I think it relates to where we're at. Another term, as we're continuing our terms, Lindy effect. The Lindy effect suggests that the longer something survives, the more likely it is to endure in the future. We could probably think of some counter examples. Like silent films had been going on for a while, and then silent films were pushed out by talking films, right? Black and white films were pushed out by color pictures. Film itself was pushed out by hard drives and digital this and that. So there's plenty of technologies where this is not the case. Nevertheless, it's a well-studied idea, this Lindy effect, that the longer something survives, the more likely it is to endure in the future. Gentlemen, can you think of some examples of that or how that applies to Bitcoin here?
It's hard for me to differentiate this between like a network effect in some ways. Like these are kind of, I think, closely linked together. So you think about, and these maybe aren't good examples, but I think about like CD players and then transitioning to MP3s, in those sort of file formats. So talk about maybe the layer that they're built on, that the more people have used them, the longer they've been around, usually means they're going to be entrenched more. So you even, see, I don't know if they're still cool, like record players were coming back. I had one, bought a couple of new records, stuff like that, vinyl. But then even you think about the internet protocol itself, like what the internet is built upon, the technology that enables that to go. Email the same way, that once I don't fully understand all this stuff, so talking all over my head, but at one point there was multiple ways to do email, right? But now there is one generally accepted way to do it. And so because of that, the longer it's been around, the more gets built upon it, the more infrastructure there is. Think about the analogy of a big ship that is hard to turn, right? And so it takes a lot of effort to do with sort of moving or going from one thing to another. And so it's this idea that the more things are around, the more they're used, the harder they're to change, but the more they sort of adapt to whatever is going on too. So, Ben, any ideas come to mind for you?
Yes. So once upon a time, I was a library director. Maybe you guys remember those
I
days.
remember this.
And we had this huge collection at Concordia Seminary in the library of rare books, and like 6,000 of them. And one of my jobs at one point was to run an appraisal of all the rare books, and we got really into categorizing rare books, and we kept these really special rare books in a specific place. They had a specific title because there was the Lindy effect that had happened. So when the printing press came out, 1485, there took about 50 years or so for the world to switch from handwritten manuscripts to printed books. And that transition phase where it just took a long time for the world to transition from one tech to another, from manuscripts to printed books. There was this 50-year period where books that were printed, they were trying to figure out how to make printing beautiful and not just have people say, oh well, this doesn't have any value because you just printed a million of these. And they call those rare books incunabula, which is a Latin word that at its root has to do with the like infancy and this sort of thing. At any rate, it took a long time for handwritten manuscripts to give way to printed books. Today, I mean, we learn how to write in school, right? All of us learned handwriting in school. My kids still do as well. We still write handwritten notes. That technology has persisted, pens and paper, and yet technology, so it was very slow to replace handwritten books. I think the Lindy effect is really helpful for people who are deeply into Bitcoin, who get frustrated that not more people are getting it sooner. We're only 15 years into the history of Bitcoin, and we probably should expect that it takes another 20 or 30 years, like printed books coming into existence. The other thing that I would say for those that aren't into Bitcoin but are Bitcoin curious is the how technology is assimilated. It's just slow, and things like US dollars printed on cotton paper, that technology probably will persist for a good long while. And as Americans in our tech age, we're used to things just flipping over quickly, but we're talking about a change, the magnitude of going from handwritten to the printing press. Long answer, but there it is.
I like it. I like it. Jared, I have a thought coming in. You'd mentioned its relationship to network effects. So network effects is more people, more connections. You could say maybe a tighter weave of the fabric, right? It's not some sort of loose spider web. It's intricate and it's well made. The bigger that network effect happens, as that network effect comes about, though, the technology itself is tested over time. It's tested by enemies, but it's also tested by friends who are that want to be friends. They want to like the technology, but they're skeptics of it. So one aspect also of the Lindy, pardon me, the Lindy effect is the idea of the longer amount of time something survives, the more likely it is to continue, because in its lifespan beyond infancy, right? As it grows up, it's surviving challenges, it's surviving attacks, and it's showing its resilience over time. So there's sort of a technological aspect of it that has to do with that. It's surviving attacks and showing itself to be rigorous and strong. Yeah, which makes me think of Nassim Taleb, what is his one?
Anti-fragility.
Anti-fragility, that's it. Makes me
Yeah.
think of that as well. That we all look at Bitcoin and we want it to be challenged. We want it to be challenged. We want it to pass muster so that we can talk to that with friends who do have questions, so that the network itself is strong and robust because we've invested in it. You know, we're not afraid of the challenges that come its way. We want them to be dealt with honestly and rigorously, and it feels like over the course of time it's moved from a fragile thing in the early years when Satoshi Nakamoto released it. Even he didn't know if it would last, right? But only
Right.
the course of time, a growing network effect, and a lot of people, again, whether for or against it, actually challenging the thing and finding out, by golly, it's robust. It really is robust.
I think a great example of this is the China mining ban. So this is sort of my like real big
There you go.
Lindy effect, right? That I've experienced at least in the time I've been in Bitcoin. So we've talked about mining here on the podcast, that there are these little boxes that are running the software, doing the thing to try and mine a new block. And I don't know, it was 2020 or something like that. I forget exactly when, 2021. China banned mining completely, like said, you cannot do this here anymore. And so one of you could pull up a chart of the hash rate. That would be really cool to tell me how much it went down. I know it went down 50%. So the amount of miners are measured in what's called a hash rate. So how many hashes per second, how many times that person is rolling a die, the machine, to try and find the right nonce, the right number that will then get the block, was cut in half. And so that means also 50% of the network security, right? So if you have more than 50% of the network, then you get to control what goes on the blockchain. And so in that moment, Bitcoin experienced a 50% drop in its network security, its ability to prevent other people from taking control, from, forcing the ledger to say whatever they wanted. And it was it was a scary moment for people. Like, it was oh no, like, is Bitcoin really dead? Like, what's going to happen? Because this is a massive, massive, massive thing. But then today, I mean, I know the difficulty levels over 100 trillion now, but hash rate, I know too, is up and to the right. But it's also gone so far that there are rumors that China is actually thinking about unbanning Bitcoin itself too. And so, in some ways, it's like the Lindy effect fully played out, that here's a country who thought they could ban it, or should, did it. And even at the height of the ban, there was still data coming out from these companies that track where people mine, that there were still people mining in China underground somehow. And so, even though they try to ban it, eventually the hash rate goes somewhere else. Miners are mining now, and we're way up. More people are mining than they were before. But they've actually come all the way around and said, well, we actually can't ban this thing. And maybe it's actually to our detriment that we've tried to do that, and now we want to get back in with. So I'll let you guys speak to anything about hash rate. Can you throw out any numbers?
I didn't find anything. Oh, there we go. Good job, Ben.
Great. So you can see that really little dip in 2020. It looks little, which is hilarious. But that, I think that was the mining ban right there, right? So it went from 178, oh my gosh, ethahash to something a lot less than that. And now, I mean, we're almost up to 800. So we're at, let's just call it 4x what it was at the peak of that. So you talk about something that withstood a giant attack, now has come back in full strength. So I think that's a perfect example of what we're talking about.
Yep, and that dip was exactly it. It was exactly when it happened. It was May of 21 is when they imposed the ban, and then that huge drop right there into July is what happened. So yeah, look at how much it has recovered since then, and we don't know exactly who all is mining Bitcoin, because you don't have to say who is who you are. You People can't tell what your miner is. They just see the numbers, right? So maybe China is back to mining Bitcoin and just hasn't announced it yet. Who knows?
Well, and I feel like we could wrap then two more terms in real quickly, because it all does come together. The Lindy effect, as you pointed out, Jared, has to do with China and what took place with them. So, the longer something survives, the more technologically robust it is, very likely, the more socially accepted it is. And it's just survived, for instance, the bans, when China banned mining, right? And that goes over to another one called game theory. The game theory says we've got different participants. So let's not think of individuals like the three of us, but let's think about nations. China says we're banning Bitcoin mining in China. Well, why are they coming back to it now? Seemingly. Why? Because for those who have stuck with it, it's been hugely advantageous. They shot themselves in the foot. So game theory has played out, and they've said, I can take my ball and go home, but all the other kids are having a good time. So, China's coming back to it. Same thing with the U.S. government. We can talk which politicians coming into office, are they for or against it? But that doesn't even take into consideration what's happening at the global scale. Whether one party's more for or against it, game theory says that over time, if other nations play in this and have success, it doesn't matter who the leader of the U.S. is. The U.S. will come. The question is just a matter of timing. So game theory is there. And finally, I think that connects with one that we've mentioned before. You, I think, have mentioned it, Ben, which is the Devlin effect, which says, the more expensive something is, the more desirable it is. And maybe you can see how that connects with the Lindy effect and game theory also. I can think of the gentleman out of New York City. I think he runs a hedge fund, Anthony Scaramucci. He has said publicly, I don't know if he said it about this price point, but it would surprise me. The effect of what he says is that Bitcoin is more investable at 100,000 per Bitcoin than it was at 20,000, because the more real world purchasing power it has, the more it's seen as, okay, it's survived, it's legitimate, it's viable, it's respected, And so that's an interesting thought. If you tell me, David, you have a chance to get into Bitcoin at 100,000 today, but 2 years ago you could have gotten it for 20,000, I'll say, why do I even bother? I missed all the upside. But Anthony Scaramucci, dealing with extreme wealth, says, oh, no. The Devlin effect says it's more investable today. It's safer. It's a safer, more, it's a real asset. It's proven itself over the course of time.
I mean, can we just throw the Overton window in there while we're at it too? I mean, that, to me, that's the thing that just continues to blow my mind as I continue to watch things happen. That if you would have asked me, a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, would the president-elect be talking about establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve? Let's not even talk about, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I would have told you were ludicrous, right? Yesterday we had Jerome Powell being asked, can the Federal Reserve buy Bitcoin? Just the amount of sort of times it is now being mentioned. So that's what the Overton window is. What was socially acceptable, what was normal changes as people make it acceptable by talking about it in this sort of way. And so it has shifted from being incredibly niche, incredibly weird, some internet people with their fake internet money, to now politicians are talking about it. And again, like we said, it doesn't really matter. Bitcoin is bigger than any government, any politician singularly. But still, all of those things contribute to the Overton window, because now, too, as we've talked about in the past, BlackRock is here, Fidelity is here. And so big, giant wealth managers are also shifting the window where this is okay. This isn't, money that's being used for drugs on the internet or, bad things on the black market. No, this is actually an acceptable asset to hold, to buy, to have in your custody sort of thing. It is just, it's amazing to me, regardless of what you think about Bitcoin, to watch the Overton window shift on how people think about it, how they talk about it, and sort of the level of social acceptedness, if you will, of Bitcoin itself in Carmen Palas, which is just it's wild. It's so wild.
It is. It is. It is. Well, we've made it through our list. It's hardly an exhaustive list. There's other things we could talk about, and I'm sure things will come up again in the future. It's been fun for me, though. I collected a bunch of these, and then I suggested to my friends here, to the gents, in order. And it's not like it didn't have to be in this order, but we do that, right? We try and find common orders or natural orders. And having gone through the second half of the list today, it still holds for me that they kind of build one upon the next. Well, we are excited about saving some of the fruits of our labor in Bitcoin. That is true. But since you mentioned it's December 19th, even though we are an asynchronous podcast, this will come out weeks from now, I can't help but think about Matthew chapter 1, where it is said that she, Mary, will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save God's people from their sins. So we like saving in Bitcoin, but Bitcoin is not our salvation. But Jesus is. I think that is our actual joy in all of life, with our wives, our children, the churches we attend and serve, our neighbors as well. And so we would want to say that very explicitly to you, our hearers, and thank you for being with us for another session.